I think the greatest threat facing our country today, surprise, is not China. It's actually the extreme political partisanship from both sides of the political aisle. And it's marked by this incivility. It's marked by name calling. It's marked by getting down to the mud with folks who want to go there. And I've just never wanted to go there. So I'm not going to get in that type of contest with Donald Trump. He enjoys being in that milieu. And I don't think it's good for the country.
And so joining us now on Open Book is Mark T. Esper. He's the 27th Secretary of Defense. He wrote a phenomenal book. Mark, it truly enjoyed the book, A Sacred Oath, Memories of a Secretary of Defense During Extraordinary Times. There's also a great background in this book about your life and what you've done. And first of all, thank you for your service.
Well, thanks, Anthony.
I've known of you, but I got to tell my viewers and listeners, when I first really met Mark for the first time, I opened the door to the suite at the Army-Navy game, and Mark said to me, "Oh, are you here for the Trump Fire Support Network?" And I said, "Yes." Well, of course I am. Okay, although I was probably the most short-lived of all the people, but it was certainly a very impactful time in my life. I got fired before it was fashionable to get fired, by the way. I was like the first of the 80 people that got fired. But you are a man that loves the country. You wrote something. I'm going to read this to my viewers because I really want them to go out and buy your book because they'll learn so much about what makes this country great. Mark Meadows called you and said, the president isn't happy with you. You're not sufficiently loyal. And you said, and I quote, "My oath is to the Constitution, not to him." What do you think, Mark, about all of this? Like, when you read the Constitution, you served the country, you went to West Point, you understand this decentralized nature of the government, the checks and balances in the system. What do you think is going on right now? Like, what do we need to do? You and me are contemporaries. What do we need to do to teach younger people about the sacredness of what you said to Mark Meadows?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're very kind and generous in your comments, and I appreciate you giving me the chance today to talk about my memoir and whatever else, topical events you want to discuss. So thank you. I appreciate that. Look, I was very fortunate to have been accepted to go to West Point at the young age of 18 in what were still the formative years of my life. And so at the academy, they taught us the importance of duty and honor and country that was drilled into you and explained to you and emphasized. And of course, the criticality of putting your country above all things. And as I write in the memoir, I swore my first oath to the Constitution at the age of 18, not at the age of 55 or so when I became Secretary of Defense. So it was something I lived with from a very young age and continued throughout a career in the Army and eventually as a civilian. So, look, I think the important thing to answer your specific question is people coming into service for the country, either through the military, of course, but as civilians, whether you're a political appointee or a career civilian, you've got to understand that oath comes number one. It's to the Constitution. It's not to a president. It's not to a party. It's not to a political philosophy. Frankly, it's not to your own policy preferences. And oftentimes we have that happen in our government as well. But it's what is the oath to the country, what's best. And then from there, you are responsible for carrying out your tasks.
I mean, so well said. And we've got probably so many war stories that we could share. We would laugh about together because I worked with Trump during the campaign more than in the White House. Mm-hmm. And I guess I didn't see the kaleidoscope going on in his brain that I should have. That's my fault. I have to own that. But I want to go over a couple of things, and I'm just going to call it crazy shit. Is that okay? Because, people know I'm a profane person.
Sure, that's an acceptable contemporary
yes, you accept this. Okay, so this is some crazy shit in A Sacred Oath, your fantastic book. Okay, number one, he proposed going after the cartels and said no one would know it was us. He suggested bringing the military to shoot protesters. You can't get more authoritarian than that. That would have been like Tiananmen Square. He proposed military action in Venezuela. He proposed a blockade of Cuba. I know from other sources inside the White House, he asked people, well, what if we nuked Tehran? I mean, the guy was like, now Trump would always say that he was just kidding or all this other stuff, but he's the American president saying and spewing this sorts of nonsense. So now, you're a rational guy. You have a phenomenal reputation and you're very well read. How do you respond to this? And I'll again call it crazy shit. So how do you respond to crazy shit like this, Mark?
Well, part of the challenge too, I might add though, is you had many folks around him enabling or amplifying.
Yes, no question. Yeah, no, they were his sycophants.
Exaggerating
yes.
those ideas. So that was also presented another complication for a number of folks in the administration who were trying to kind of manage this, if you will. So look, I think you have to go back in all things, whether it's the military, government, corporate life, and I've served in all three. What are your core principles and what's the mission of your institution? And stay true to those things. And I always felt that I owed the president my honest advice. I owed him options more than just one that he might choose or propose, and try and figure out how do I help him advance the policies that he was elected for, but do so within certain guardrails, if you may, that have been long established with regard to our Constitution, of course, the law, and the norms of accepted behavior, if you will. So that I kind of viewed that as my job, because I had not just a responsibility to the country, but also to my institution, to the people who work for me, both civilian and military. All these different factors play in when you're in these jobs. And you experienced it as well during your tenure at the White House. There are a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people with different opinions and different agendas, oftentimes not, a lot of times they're personal agendas, unfortunately. And those are other things that you have to work around.
I mean, you see, this is why you lasted longer than me, because you're like such a diplomat. I used to like fight with him and say, are you effing crazy? And he would look at me and then he would say, oh, well, I'm just kidding. I'm like, well, you don't sound like you're the American president. I mean, he had me in Air Force One in the office, and he's like, I'm going to veto the Russian sanctions bill. I don't know if you remember, this was like July of 2017. Paul Ryan and McConnell passed the sanctions bill because of what the tampering in the election. I'm going to veto it and show these guys Russia had nothing to do with my election. I'm like, they're going to call Chuck Schumer and override the veto. And then he looks at me, he's like, they can do that? I'm like, yeah, they can do that. Then he calls McCann, the White House, he's calling him from the Air Force One, and he's asking him if they could do that. Yeah. And of course, McCann says that they can do that. And then he looks at me and goes, oh, you're a smart cookie. Next day, he signs the bill. Kushner asked me, well, how the hell did you get him to sign it? I said, I told them they were going to get an override. These are his teammates.
But you were doing exactly what you should do. Just what I said. You were being honest with him, your best advice, and you were giving him information that he didn't have, that somebody else might not have told him.
But Jared said something very telling, Mark. He said, you can't talk to him like that, because now he knows that you know something that he didn't know, and he's so insecure that he's going to say, oh, Anthony's out there telling people that I'm an idiot, that I don't know. You don't talk to him like that. I said, he goes, I couldn't get him to sign it for 6 weeks. I said, well, why didn't you just tell him they were going to override? He goes, you can't talk to him like that. And you know exactly what I'm talking about, because McMaster and I, McMaster was trying to explain to Shia and a Sunni the difference between the two Muslim faiths, the sects, and he got pissed off because he felt like he was being lectured to. You follow what I'm saying?
Look, there is a way to do it, and I said this a couple times. You have to learn how to manage your boss, right? Or how you manage yourself with the boss to kind of make sure that you can help him get to the right place, and that's part of the art. Some of that drama is too much for me to figure out, and again, my view is to always, present it faithfully, give him my honest opinions, and if he didn't like it, which he often didn't, that's fine. But I felt I was doing my job, and you obviously had a different relationship because yours was more personal, arguably, than mine. But look, that's what we do. That's what you owe, not just him, but you owe the country in the role you're playing.
I guess I have to ask you this. I hope you don't mind me asking you this, because I have to ask this of myself, and so I've got to, and if it's a little bit of our support group thing. So what were you thinking? Okay, because my friend Vinny Viola, he looked at the situation. He was offered the Secretary of the Army. He said, not for me. I made the mistake of ego. I think you were thinking about service, right? You were like, okay, how can I better the country, right?
Right. And Vinny approached it the same way.
Right.
Vinny entered West Point at age 18 or so. He's another great American hero, and he would have done a great job as Secretary of the Army, but he had obviously a much more, far more complicated financial situation than I had. But look, he and I and others are, gluttons for service, if you will. And
Right.
that public service calling has always been there and probably always will. And look, that's what you go in to serve. You go to serve your country. Again, not necessarily a president or a party or a philosophy, but your country. And that's why it was, it's been so unfair. And this happens every cycle. Both sides of the party is people start casting blame and name calling about people who choose to serve. And I think that's wrong. It's unfair. There are some who deserve it. Yeah. But it's a minority. Well, most people go to serve their country.
I'll tell you that you and I obviously have a mutual friend. We didn't start out so friendly because he fired my ass. Okay, that was General Kelly, but we've become very close friends, and he is incredibly fond of you. I was in Iowa at a public speaking event with him, and he said, you and Mark Esper would get on. You gotta get together with Mark. So it was fortunate that we were able to connect with each other.
Well, he's a great man. He's given his entire life to the country. His son served. He lost his son in combat for the country.
Yes, he's a Gold Star. He's a 4-star general, Gold Star family member. You and Kelly have something in common, though, which is remarkable restraint. Okay, so I want you to react to this. Okay, in the book, it's sort of after the book. Trump tweets out about your book, okay, that you were a rhino, which is a Republican in name only. You were incapable of leading, and I had to run the military myself, which is typical Trump nonsense, okay? When he started firing at me, okay, I have no restraint. I think I called him the fattest president since William Howard Taft because I know he hates being so fat. But you guys, give me the restraint lesson. Guys, is that coming from the military? Is that coming from... All right, I'm just going to ignore this. Go ahead. Give me the restraint lesson.
Look, I think part of it is how I was raised, number one. Number two is...
Right, I was raised like a wild animal swinging from the trees.
No.
You were raised in this really morally rectitude field.
Parents.
What's that?
But look, I think the second thing, I think the greatest threat facing our country today, surprise, is not China. It's actually the extreme political partisanship from both sides of the political aisle. And it's marked by this incivility. It's marked by name calling. It's marked by getting down to the mud with folks who want to go there. And I've just never wanted to go there. So I'm not going to get in that type of contest with Donald Trump. He enjoys being in that milieu, and I don't. And I don't think it's good for the country. So look, he called, like you said, he name calls everybody. He calls me a rhino. I worked in Reagan's think tank, if you will, the Heritage Foundation, a conservative organization. I worked for Republican conservative leaders on the Hill, ranging from Jesse Helms to Fred Thompson to Bill Frist. So I'm comfortable that my record speaks to the fact that I'm a Republican, but I'm a Reagan Republican.
Right.
And I believe in common sense, core American values. And
I appreciate that. I got the chance to sit next to Ed Meese in 2012.
Good man.
One of the Republican events in D.C. We did a debate in D.C. as Governor Romney was rising to the nomination. I got, just by luck, I happened to be sitting next to him. And, that was a thrill for me because obviously I admired him as a student when I was a kid.
Right.
I want to set the scene about the American military and the Pentagon. And I want you to tell us some things, from your life experience in your book, which you write about this amazing organization known as the Defense Department and your time there. And what would you say to young people about their Defense Department and the Pentagon, the culture there, and the responsibility that it has not only here, but around the world?
I'm going to differentiate the question a little bit too, because there's the Pentagon, and I served 5 tours in that building as both an Army officer and a civilian. So I know the Pentagon, but I think more importantly, I want to talk about the armed forces, the fielded forces, whether it's a ship at sea, a Marine training, a forward deployed soldier, whatever the case may be. That is the heart and soul of America's military. That's where you have young men and women from all walks of life, from all quarters of the country, from all faiths and ethnicities coming together, wearing a common uniform with a standard mission to defend our nation. And they work together to do it, and often under very trying circumstances. And they bring their families along to do it as well. And that's probably the toughest job in the military. So to me, there's a big difference. And I tell young people, look, you don't have to serve a career. Come serve 2, 3, 4 years. You'll never regret it. You'll meet some of the best people you'll ever will. You'll stay friends forever. The experiences will carry you a lifetime, and you'll learn some tremendous skills that any employer would love to have in his or her workplace. And that's kind of my pitch to young people today.
And it is very well said. I guess, you know, and I want to hear all that. I think it's very important for young people to hear it. Let me take a different approach to the question, because I don't think people understand the magnitude, Mark. You know, I mean, Is it an $800 billion military? How big is the footprint around the world? How many bases? What is the design plan? You know, why is our Navy so large? What are we thinking about with our Navy?
Look, it's the one of the top 2 or 3 largest organizations in the world, certainly the largest in the United States government. 2.8 million people, civilian and military, a $840 billion budget. We have, I think, 1,700 installations around the world in almost 100 plus countries. And it's a vast organization focused on one thing: defending the American people, defending the country, and advancing our interests abroad. And that's why we have a global military force with an international footprint. And every day, again, young Americans, most of them are between 17 and 24, are out there on the front lines doing it. And, you know, the job I held, people think about, like you said, the Navy, the Air Force. But look, you're also responsible for hospitals and daycare centers and schools and electric facilities and you name it, all kinds of things. It's like running a small city that's deployed around the world in all these locations.
It's a truly extraordinary thing. The more I learn about it, the more impressed I am. But yet we both know that even though we have this amazing military, all this great technology, it still can't solve every problem around the world. And so we've got this big problem going on in the Ukraine right now. You know, I've listened to some of your interviews. You were a little critical of what was going on in Ukraine with the Biden administration. What are your thoughts now? Tell us what you think is going on in the Ukraine, and what do you think the potential outcomes could be?
Well, look, I think Ukraine marks the first battle of this long struggle in the 21st century between autocracies and democracies. And it's proven a strategic failure on multiple levels for Vladimir Putin. And Ukraine has showed us the virtue of strength and tenacity and skill and courage by pushing back a much, much bigger neighbor who's a bully. And they've taught us some lessons about tenacity and grit, right? And so I think it's important for America to live up to our values and, frankly, to defend forward that we support the Ukrainians. They're not asking us for men and material, American soldiers, Marines or whatnot, to come defend them. All they're asking for is arms and ammunition. And I think the quicker and sooner we can provide that, which is where I've been critical of the Biden administration, that the shorter this war will be and the less deadly, if you will. But look, we think about it in Europe, but Xi Jinping in Beijing is watching very closely what's happening, and he's sizing us up. He's sizing up our NATO allies. He's sizing up the Western democracies. And I'm sure it's all figuring into his calculations about whether he attacks or tries to seize Taiwan or some other neighbor in the Indo-Pacific. Right.
So it's interesting. We're there providing the support. It's the right cause, but we also have to send messages to other people that we're going to protect freedom and democracy around the world, which is super important to us. Right. So let me frame it differently, because I think it's important for Americans to understand this. Why, though? Because remember, we've had a history of isolationism, and we have a history of people saying, hey, that's not our problem. Franklin Roosevelt had some great speeches in the late 30s explaining, well, actually, it is our problem because it's going to end up on our shores.
That's right.
So explain it to us, Mark.
Look, the best way to explain it is something nearly everybody understands. It's the schoolyard bully, right? If you don't stand up to the schoolyard bully, all the bully does is pick on more kids, other kids, and eventually it comes around to you, right? And so if you can stand up, face that bully down, it puts him in his place, and you can rid yourself of the problem, if you will. Look, if Russia captures Ukraine, who's going to be next? Georgia, Moldova? Would he then try and make a move on the Baltics? And at the same time, while Putin is acting very aggressively in Europe, does that give Xi Jinping, the motivation to make a move as well. If we're tied down there and we're not responding, does Xi Jinping look and say, look, the Americans really are weak. They're focused inward. They really don't care about international affairs. They're not going to support others. So I'll make my move now. And at the end of the day, look, the vision that Xi Jinping in Beijing wants to achieve is a world by the year 2049 where China dominates, where we're living by their rules and norms. And I would say to you and your listeners, if you love living in a surveillance state with concentration camps, if you love having no personal freedoms, no liberty, if you love having no rule of law, then move to China, move to Russia. But that's not the world I want to live in. I want my kids to live in. And that's what we're fighting for. And we don't want to go back to the Cold War, but unfortunately, it looks like we're heading that way.
You brought up 2049, and the reason I believe that you did that is that they have these 10, 15, 20, 100-year plans. 2049 would be the 100th anniversary of the communist takeover of
Chinese Communist Party, right?
Mainland China. Right. And so I guess my question to you is, where is our long-term planning? We had a policy of containment. George Kennan helped to develop it. It became the Truman Doctrine, 40-year plan, contain communism, defeat communism. The plan begins in 1946. It ends in 1989 or something like that. You get my point. Where is our long-term planning now?
Wow. Well, first of all, I commend you for that quick recitation of American foreign policy's history and strategic doctrine. So that's great. Look, we've struggled for finding out what that doctrinal name is since the end of the Cold War in 1991. And I think we're going back to containment, if you will, containment of the Chinese. And I'm fine with that because they are the ones misbehaving. They're the ones trying to change the international order. But we haven't come to that yet. Now, this is where I give credit to the Trump administration. I think an achievement of that era was the fact that we consolidated a view within the United States government that China is a long-term strategic threat, and that we need to get all organs of government focused on that. And I think we made a lot of accomplishments. And my role was to really implement a national defense strategy that said just that. And we made a lot of progress with regard to doing that, standing up a China office, reorienting our doctrine, making sure that we were teaching Chinese tactics in our schools, all those types of things. But we're still not there yet as a country. We need a countrywide approach. And then we need our allies and partners to come along. Some are already there, particularly if you look to into the Asia Pacific. But in Europe, they're not all there yet. And we'll need to stand together if we're going to deal with that. But I think we're coming full circle back to the strategy to containment. So
let me ask the obvious question. Chinese have a different economy than the former Soviet Union.
They have one.
Exactly, and they've got a lot going on there that is in some ways very powerful. They've got AI going on, chip development and manufacturing. They've deployed a lot of resources into this market-based, communist, centralized, hybrid economy where the government is helping the private sector and vice versa. There's a positive loop there. There's negative loops in some ways, but there's a positive loop there, which is different from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was weakened by its ideology. The Chinese Communist Party has a different sort of ideology, harder to combat. Mark, what's your reaction to that? And then how would we have to gauge ourselves to win that, if you will, that competition?
Look, great point. You've summed it up well. A very great insights. And you're right. I mean, the Soviet Union was, I like to say, a unidimensional threat, right? We were really concerned about their military capability. China is a full spectrum threat. They have a very large, capable military. They have a very large economy, the second largest in the world. It's very diverse. It's number 3. They have a lot of tech prowess. And number 4, they have a lot of diplomatic reach as well. So they are a full spectrum threat. And that'll be the challenge, particularly on the economic side. We see some of our partners in Europe, especially Germany and France. And for example, President Macron and the head of the EU Commission are there right now or just left China on a trade deals. That's the area that is the most complex because we are so integrated, our economies, United States, European, so forth and so on. We're not going to completely break from China, nor should we, but I do think we need to have what we call the strategic decoupling. That means key key areas such as rare earth elements and certain materials. That means semiconductors. That means some other high-end technologies that are really crucial to the Chinese military and intelligence apparatus. I think we need to start denying them. The administration has done a good job on this, begun in the Trump era, and I think it needs to continue. But we're going to see a strategic decoupling, but not a complete decoupling, because we can't afford to do so, frankly.
Yeah, well, we can't afford to do so, but also I think we both know that a little bit of economic interdependence and a little bit of commercial activity between us may reduce some of the tension.
Yeah, you hope. That was the theory when we let them into the WTO in 2000, 2001. And as you know, I write about this in my memoir. I was there in Congress at the Senate at the time. And the theory was, if we let them into the WTO, if we brought them into all these international organizations, that they would continue to moderate over time and change and become accepting of the international order. And it just hasn't proven itself true. And as you know, I mean, again, I part of me wants to believe that economic integration argument, but we've seen Xi Jinping crack down really hard in the economic sector in China, particularly the tech sector, and it's hurt him economically. Now, it looks like he's trying to claw his way back a little bit and find some type of middle ground. But this is going to be a fundamental question going forward: is where will Xi Jinping take his economy?
You're bringing up a fascinating point, because that's how we all got trained, right? That's the whole Kissinger, Nixon, even Reagan. Then Xiaoping. He's reforming. Let's help them rise, increase their living standards. I mean, this goes back to George Marshall, rising living standards around the world.
Yeah, we brought almost 700 million Chinese out of poverty just by letting them in and helping them come forward.
Right. No, it's fascinating. President Xi visited President Trump in April of 2017. He was carrying a book with him by Graham Allison, the dean of the Kennedy School. And I think the title of the book was Destined for War. And the thesis in the book was that a rising superpower often threatens the existing power structure. I mean, he took it all the way back to the Peloponnesian War between Athens.
Yeah, it's the so-called Thucydides trap.
Right, exactly. He took it right back to the Peloponnesian War. And so he put you through 16 episodic events, 12 of which we went to war, 4 of which we didn't. The most dramatic one was when the UK was in decline and its kissing cousin, the United States, was in rise. And so they were okay. Same Christianity, same set of rules, and, white English speaking people, let's just be frank about it. So they didn't go after each other. But now you have 2 different tribes. One is rising, and we can debate whether or not one is declining. I'd like to think America's best days are ahead of it if we can get our act together.
I agree.
But here we are. So what do you say to that as a foreign policy theorist, a defense theorist? How do we prevent the tension that the Thucydides trap, if I'm even pronouncing it right, is upon us right now, between us and the Chinese?
Well, it's an interesting theory, a lot of historical example, and it's important that we learn from it, from those examples. I don't think that war with China is inevitable, and certainly not imminent. I think it's something that we need to continue to manage. I think you have to work it in multiple ways, and in some of those ways may seem like they conflict with each other, but they don't. So, for example, going back to our previous discussion, I think we need to continue to pursue some degree of economic integration in as many non-strategic areas as possible. That gives everybody on both sides incentive not to go to war, not to have tension. On the other hand, at the same time, we need to build the most capable military we can. It goes back to Ronald Reagan's peace through strength doctrine. And we need to bring our allies and partners along with us, because what we want is Xi Jinping to wake up every morning, to look outside his window. We want him to look at the Taiwan Strait and look at Taipei and say, not today. It's not worth it. It's not worth losing my economy, and it's not worth having my military destroyed by the United States and its allies. And that's what we have to manage until we get a new set of leaders in Beijing.
Mm-hmm. I think it's well said, and I think that's been the policy, and I think it's also reflected there in the Ukraine. The late and very terrific and the late great Ash Carter, had the opportunity to interview him a few months prior to his untimely death. He said something to me. He said something to me that I want you to react to. He said, Anthony, the Russian military has been decimated, incredibly weakened, more so than even the press is indicating. And obviously, there's propagandists on both sides. The Russians are telling us they're winning the war. The Ukrainians, we believe, are winning the war. What is really happening there? And is Ash Carter correct that their military has been decimated?
Yeah. So first of all, yeah, we miss Ash. He was a good man, and his death was so tragic and too soon, right, for all of us. But
absolutely,
he was a very smart man too, and I was privileged to get to know him. He was helpful to me when I was Secretary of Defense. But look, I think he's right. We know at this point more than 90% of the Russian ground forces have been committed to Ukraine, and they've been torn up, decimated. And I think in a way that, look, they've proved themselves not to be very capable going into the fight, whether from the general officer level to the NCOs to the privates. Their equipment has been found to have many flaws and weaknesses. Their tactics are unsound. So when you take all that and you decimate it, look, not only do they have a very incapable, incompetent ground force now, it will take them years and years and years to rebuild it because their industrial base has been wiped out as well. And that is due largely to the economic and financial and other sanctions, tech sanctions we placed on them. And we need to continue to do that. Now, that said, that's the good news. The bad news is their Air Force is largely intact. Their Navy is largely intact, and it's a very good Navy. And they still have nuclear weapons. And so we need to be very cognizant that they still remain, while their army's been decimated, they still remain quite capable. Whether they are as competent in those other areas as we thought their army was, who knows? But I think we need to be, we need to keep those things into consideration.
When you and I were young, although I'm in denial and I like to think of myself as still young, we
both are.
Yeah, exactly. Let's continue the denialism, Marcus. Okay, but
yes.
in the 1989 period, I was coming out of law school and I was told Japan Inc. and that the Japanese were going to take over the world. They had the best economic footprint and their stock market was soaring and they were going to eat everybody's lunch. That did not happen. We were told that the Soviet Union prior to that could eventually envelop the world. That did not happen. I'm wondering if sometimes we think linearly, but the world's happening around us exponentially. Is there a scenario where Putin loses control and even possibly the Chinese Communist Party? Because you and I both know, we're students of history, these one-party systems have a tendency to last about 70 years. And then they break down and they sort of dissolve. And both of these things are in overtime. So what say you to that sort of radical contrarian thought?
Well, first of all, I agree with you about what was talked about in the early 90s. I was going to grad school then as well. And everybody wants to predict America's decline and demise and downfall. And we're just such a vibrant nation with this, the spirit of immigrants coming in and a very innovative culture. You can never count us out. So I'm very hopeful.
We like failure in this culture. I mean, I've been failing upwards for 30 years, Esper.
There you go.
Failing upwards.
There you go. Well, look, we got fired in our last job, so there you go.
Yeah, well, it won't be the last time I've been fired, though. I can assure you of that. Okay, I'm looking forward to more firings in my future.
But these authoritarian states are quite brittle, and they get more brittle over time. And I think it's questionable as to what happens to Putin. He's now fighting a three-front war, right? He's fighting a military battle in Ukraine. He's fighting, if you will, the West, led by NATO, and he's fighting on the home front. There's a lot of tension inside Russia, and the question is, can he survive that? I don't know Russian politics all that well, but we also know that he's a former KGB agent. I'm sure he knows what's happening all around him, but he could fall. He could be pushed out. Now, whoever comes behind him may not necessarily be better. It could be a real, hardcore right winger. We just don't know, and this is why it's so important. We need to get beyond Putin and try and restore some sense of democracy in that country so that we have, there's more checks and balances in what happens there. And look, Xi Jinping in the other part of the world just secured himself a third unprecedented term for 5 years. If he remains healthy, he'll probably take another 5 years. He's going to be around for a while, I suspect. So these guys aren't going away, certainly not the Chinese leadership anytime soon.
Well said. I guess my last question on this, and I'm going to switch to my lightning round. And we'll conclude this fascinating interview. But is democracy? I think we're trying to export it into Iraq. Iraq is probably a better place today than it was when Saddam Hussein had it, but obviously it's a difficult place. But is it exportable? Number one, is democracy exportable? Number two, are nations like Russia and China, tell me, they've had histories of kingdoms, monarchies, czars, autocracy. So is it possible to even break that cycle and create democracy in countries like those?
Well, there's far more better qualified people than me to answer this, but I'll take a stab at it. Look, I think it's exportable if the people want it, if they're willing to fight for it, if they're willing to defend it. And we didn't see that in Afghanistan, right? Mm-hmm. And it was questionable for a period of time there in Iraq. And like you said, now at least Iraq has some type of functioning democracy. There's a lot going on internal with regard to partisanship and Sunni versus Shia, as you mentioned earlier. But it's something. But look, I think at the end of the day, we can't impose our values on people. We can't impose our form of government. If they want it, if they're willing to fight for it and defend it, then I think we should help them. But I think we need to get better at figuring those things out earlier than what we did in Afghanistan, for example. We spent a lot of time there trying to work within a culture that never had, that I can recall, a true democratic experience. And because of the nature of the fight, the Civil War, they weren't willing in the end to fight for it. At least they didn't have the political leadership. Probably, to be more fair, didn't have the political leadership that was willing to stay and fight and defend it, like President Zelensky in Ukraine was willing to defend his democracy.
Well said. Okay, I've got 5 words, statements. It's actually people in your case. I need you to give me a lightning fire response to these, if you don't mind. Okay, ready? Okay. Let's start with Chris Miller.
I don't know him. I think I met him once. I don't know him.
All right, let's move on. Kash Patel.
I think I maybe met Cash once as well. His reputation is of being a bad actor, but that's based on what other people said, what I've read, so forth and so on. But
okay, so these are players coming in after the facts. You don't really know them. How about General Nakasone?
Paul Nakasone is an American treasure in many ways. He's a very capable officer who's led both the NSA and Cyber Command. I got a lot of respect for him, and we work together very well.
Vice President Pence.
I like Vice President Pence. I think he's a good man, an honest man, who did an extraordinary job, and got a lot of respect for him. He certainly showed who he really was on January 6th.
Well, I'm in your camp with the Vice President. I have an enormous amount of respect for him, and I think that, like yourself, he exercised restraint when necessary. And Mark, you're never going to say this, so I'm going to say it. Okay, I guarantee that there were things that you've done silently and anonymously that served and protected the country during your term in the Trump administration. And I know I can say that about General Kelly and, for that matter, Vice President Pence. And the most dramatic thing for Vice President Pence was the 6th of January.
Right, absolutely.
In terms of keeping our constitutional dignity. What about President Zelensky?
I think he's a man who rose to the occasion and stood tall during some tough times. I think if he would have left Kyiv in those early days of the conflict, when I guess we called over and offered him a way out, there would be a very different situation in that country now. I suspect the government would have collapsed. The military might not have fought as hard, and Russia would have occupied far more of Ukraine these days. So he's his actions are very Churchillian, if you will.
He can win this.
Absolutely, he can win this. He just needs to have the arms and ammunition and assistance that he keeps asking for, and we keep slow rolling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. We like to do that, right? What did Churchill say about us, right? We do the right thing, but we have to exhaust every other possibility, right? What about our old boss? Let's end it with Donald Trump.
Look, he's obviously a complicated figure. I've said my issue with him on many occasions is he doesn't put the country first. He puts himself first. And in leaders, you need people of character and integrity who are willing to sacrifice themselves, if you will, and certainly put country first. And he doesn't check any of those boxes for me. And so that's why I don't think he's fit to be president. I'm hoping that we see a next generation of leaders within the GOP, and frankly, on the Democrat side as well, rise up and move beyond the leaders we have today. And that's my hope. And I hope we'll see another Ronald Reagan at some point too.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I think we have to get there, and we have to help these people get there.
Right.
What's next for you before I let you go, sir?
Oh, I'm busy these days working in venture capital and private equity and boards and public speaking and stuff like that. So I have a busy agenda with lots of things, and we'll see what the future holds. I never rule anything in or out.
All right. Well, I think your future is incredibly bright, and I hope it's back in the service of our country, this fragile democracy that we both love. I appreciate you joining me today on Open Book, and the title of your book is A Sacred Oath, Memories of a Secretary of Defense During Extraordinary Times. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thank you. You take care and have a great week.
What we've seen since October 7th is it could be in academia, it could be at the Venice Film Festival, that Israeli producers are not welcome to show their wares. Hillels on campus at Jewish institutions are feeling alienated because they support Jewish identity, and therefore they're not invited into progressive circles.
Real honor to have you on. And so joining us now on Open Book is Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. He is the rabbi of the Park Avenue Synagogue since 2008, and he's a leading voice of American Jewry. He has a best-selling book out, and the book's title is For Such a Time as This, and the subtitle is On Being Jewish Today. But it's a brilliant book. You've got a couple of my friends on the back of this book, Richard Haas, Deborah Messing. I'm Deborah Messing's brother's partner, Brett Messing. He went to law school with me, so I know Deborah forever. And of course, your cardinal, Rabbi, is my cardinal, okay? And so I know the cardinal forever. What a beautiful book. And so let's do a little cavelling, if you don't mind with a little cavelling, okay? The book is outselling the Bible right now. You know you love that. You know I love that. And you know your mother loves that, Rabbi. So God bless you, okay? Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Anthony. Thank you so much for the honor.
Okay, so you grow up in Los Angeles, but you're really now a New Yorker. So let's start with the background and tell us why you came to New York, if you don't mind, and then we'll get into the book.
So born and bred Los Angeles, and I went off to University of Michigan, so a big Wolverine. And from there, a year here and there in Israel as part of growing up, met my wife in Israel, and went off to become a rabbi, to go to rabbinical school. My grandfather, blessed memory, was a rabbi in Glasgow, Scotland. So a last name like Cosgrove, one of your first questions is, what sort of Jewish name is Cosgrove? So that's where my roots are in the UK. And in a way, I just entered the family business. Right. I have one brother who is in the movie business, another brother who's in YouTube. My parents think that's really interesting. There's nothing interesting in my family about becoming a rabbi. That's what nice Jewish boys grow up to be. And then went and got my doctorate at University of Chicago. I thought I was going to be an academic. And then I went into the applied side in 2008 and became the senior rabbi of Park Avenue Synagogue, where I still serve today.
Well, I mean, this book was incredibly well written, and it's very rich in terms of insight into American Jewry, Jewry in general, and also the complexity of being a Jew today. And I'm going to measure being a Jew today. If you don't mind, you can correct me, but I'm just going to say there's a pre-October 7th, and there's now a post-October 7th. Unfortunately, just like there's an America pre-9/11, sir, and America post-9/11. And I think you write about this very eloquently. And so we are recording this roughly about a week before the anniversary of the October 7th terrorist tragedy, massacre in southern Israel. And you talk about this new reality that the Jewish community has woken up to, and as well as the generational divide. So I want to start there. Talk about pre and post October 7th. And the impact that it's had on Jews around the world and the generational impact that it's had.
We are at the 1 year mark, and unfortunately, the hostages are still captive. The war is still ongoing. In fact, the North is boiling over right now. It's a very scary time, and my fervent prayer would be that this book is dated. And unfortunately, the themes of war, of the captives, of anti-Semitism are just as urgent as ever. I think what happened on October 7th was it was a wake-up call for American Jewry. And the title of the book is For Such a Time as This. It comes from the biblical book of Esther, and it tells a story of a Persian queen who hides her identity in the king's palace in order to rise up the ranks of Persian society. And life was going good until wicked Haman's decree came down, and the fate of the Jews was on the line, and she had to step up as a woman, as a Jew, and as a queen and save the day. And that's what the Jewish festival of Purim in the spring is all about. I use that as a metaphor to frame what happened to American Jews, because we thought that the condition of American Jewry was going to be different than other chapters of Jewish history, than our European counterparts. We thought that we were blending into the melting pot of American society. And on October 7th, it wasn't just a crime against Israelis. It was a crime against Jews. It was a crime against humanity that was perpetrated that day. And then the American Jewry woke up to this moment in time, a sort of whiplash feeling that maybe things aren't as good as we thought they are, right? Maybe our assimilation into American society isn't quite as smooth. And maybe our chapter is not so different than other chapters of Jewish history. So that awakening post October 7th wasn't just in Israel, but it was felt by American Jews, which is really what this book is all about.
So, it's interesting. I went to Yad Vashem a few years ago, and for those people that are listening, what is Yad Vashem? It's a Holocaust memorial on the outskirts of Jerusalem. I've actually visited it twice in my life, and it's funny that I have different reactions every time I go because it's different times in my life, sir. But the last time I went, of all the things there, all the descriptions of the Holocaust, everything that happened, the most resonating thing for me today was a few words on a mural, and I'd like to get you to react to them. It said on a mural, as you're going through the exhibition, it said the Jews lived in Germany with peace and great prosperity for 500 years. Then Hitler came along, and 60% of the Jews moved out of Germany. But there were 40% of the Jews that felt that they were German. And we're going to talk a little bit about the hyphen, because that's part of your book. Yeah. And so the 40%, unfortunately, many of them were massacred in Germany. And so I want you to react to what I'm saying, because, I love my country. I love American Jewry. I love the Jewish people. I'm a Philo-Semite. I'm an Italian kid from Long Island who directly benefited from a good Jewish mom. Okay, that was my friend Todd's mom. She wouldn't let him leave the house to play unless he did his homework. The Italians in my neighborhood didn't give a shit about that, Rabbi. I'm just letting you know. So I went over to his house, ate a whole thing of Entenmann's cake, and I did my homework, and turned out, I was pretty smart. I had good grades. Ended up going to Tufts and Harvard. I blame that on the Jews, Rabbi, okay? It was a good Jewish upbringing. So you're talking to a Philo-Semite, somebody that has great respect for Jewish culture and has a love of American Jewry and Jewry worldwide. But what is it? Because you're closer to it than me. You're part of it. What causes this threat? What causes the hatred? What causes the murder? It's just, to me, it's so senseless, but you have a better answer than me. What is it?
I've lived in three major urban areas in the States in my life. In Los Angeles, born and bred. I lived about 10 years in Chicago, and now New York for the last 17 years. So with a few years here and there. So for me, I've always lived very comfortably with my Jewish identity. There might have been a word here or there, a slur maybe, but for the most part, to be a New York Jew is a fairly comfortable existence. So but what happened on October 7th was a new. It wasn't new. It's always existed. Anti-Semitism has been around as long as there have been Jews. And I explain in my chapter on anti-Semitism that ever since Pharaoh began oppressing Jews, said that we fear them, they're a fifth column, they're different, they're other than us, and therefore they must be oppressed. That sort of strain, that virus in the human condition, that something we don't know, we therefore fear. What we fear, we therefore hate. And what we hate, we oppress or perform violence against. And that was in the Bible. That was the Jews with Pharaoh. If you look at the history of Christianity, some very dark chapters of Jews being Christ killers and blood libels and otherwise. And under Nazi ideology, the Jew was whatever the hater of the Jew wanted to make them be, a capitalist, a communist. It didn't matter. But those Jews were deemed as others, and ultimately became 6 million of them victims of Hitler's Holocaust. And so it's a virus. And then now, what's happened with Israel? Israel has become the symbol of Jewish difference, and it has therefore be prompted all sorts of hatreds, well beyond polite differences of opinion as to where this line or that line or whatever the political debate, which reasonable people can have, mind you. I don't make the claim anywhere in the book or anywhere in my rabbinate that Israel is any different than any other country, which is to say that it has flaws. But I just think that to delegitimize the right of Jews to have a sovereign state, to marginalize expressions of Judaism because by dint of being a Jew, you support Jewish self-determination, you slide into anti-Semitism very easily. What we've seen since October 7th is it could be in academia, it could be at the Venice Film Festival, that Israeli producers are not welcome to show their wares. There are a million places. Hillels on campus, the Jewish institutions, are feeling alienated because they support Jewish identity, and therefore they're not invited into progressive circles.
So I want to test something on you. I want to get you to react to it. When I think about Judaism, it makes me think of the West, and it makes me think of Western liberalism. And what I try to explain to my friends is that you can trace our values back to the Torah. You can go right to the foundation stone of the temple and all the teachings of the ancient Torah, and you can find the laws, whether it's the Ten Commandments or other moralisms in the Torah. They have been reflected in the Western canon of law through Greece, out to Rome, into the French, and even in the aftermath of the French Revolution, British common law, King John, the Magna Carta, the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence. Every aspect of Western liberalism and the idea of freedom, sir, has come from the ancient text. And so what I find astonishing is that we don't acknowledge that enough as a society. There's some kind of disconnect. And so one, why do you think there is that disconnect? Well, do you believe what I'm saying? And if you do, why is there a disconnect? And then the second follow-up question to that is what can we do to make that better? What can we do to resolve that?
Look, I'm a Jew. I'm partisan. I'm a big cheerleader of this thing called Judaism. So I do believe, as an American Jew, that some of our core values can be traced right through the Western tradition, right to the Hebrew Bible, and you listed a few of them. Right, the idea that we can distinguish between good and evil, and that there is moral choice that is endowed on us by our Creator. The idea that every human being, black, white, straight, gay, tall, short, is created in the image of God, and therefore to be extended equal and infinite dignity. These are values, and we could go through them through the Ten Commandments and otherwise, that are embedded not just in the Jewish tradition, but in the Western tradition. And it's really a expression of that very first call out to Abraham to go forth to the land, and you shall be a blessing. That we are proud of our Judaism, but it's not an insular Judaism. It's a Judaism to be shared with the world, that we have value added to give to a broad secular humanity or other faith traditions. Your question is, why has that been stifled? What is the fear? And I think
Exactly.
I don't know. I think that the persistence of the Jew through the ages, the Romans, the Greeks, the Babylonians, other kingdoms are no longer. The Jews are still here. I think we are the pebble in the shoe to humanity. To those who like us, we are a miracle or perhaps a curiosity. But to those who hate us, we are the victims, and therefore all that which is Jewish becomes the object of hatred. So, what do you think? I mean, I know I'm the guy being interviewed, but you grew up in with Jews, with non-Jews, and otherwise. I would hear slurs every so often, but where hatred actually comes from
So
of the other.
This will probably get me in trouble on my own podcast, so I'll answer it with envy. And what I'll say to you is, it's not even a religious thing; it's an envy thing. And so, and I'm not trying to be stereotypical, sir. So forgive me if it sounds stereotypical. I'm just going to give an observation from my life. So editorialism, the culture of Judaism, okay, the secular culture. Forget about the Torah for a second. Is family values, and a commitment to education. And it sometimes centers around the mother, or usually around the mother. And the kids are taught to educate themselves, because no person can take their education away. And they're taught about the struggle and the diaspora and the ravages and the cyclicality of anti-Semitism. And so if you're educated and you're equipped, you can move to another country, or you could be portable with your brain. And they've gone on to become very successful. Jews objectively have punched over their weight economically. They have a big impact on a planet of 7 or 8 billion people. There's 14 or 15 million Jews. They obviously have a big impact on I think is one of the most important cities in the world, New York City. And there's a lot of envy, because people are envious. And so unfortunately, when people get envious, it's one of the worst of the 7 sins. Self-victimization, feeling pity for themselves, and envy. And we know that the weakest leaders in our society will scapegoat others. Weakest leaders are not aspirational, they're divisional, and they will find scapegoats to blame whatever society's problems may be on. And so it's been an easy target for the Babylonians, the Romans, the Germans. You pick the group of people, it's an easy target, and people can adhere to it, And I think it's as simple as that. So I may be wrong about all that, but what I want to ask about, because there's something you write about in the book that's left deep impact on me, which is this notion that there's a hyphen.
Yeah.
You're a Jewish American. You're a British
Italian
Jew.
American.
Italian American. There's a hyphen. And how do you reconcile the hyphen, right? Because there has to be, coming out of the Holocaust, the idea that there could be a country, a Jewish state, that would provide a safe haven for Jews after that type of a senseless, innocent massacre makes sense to me. I'm a supporter. I'm a Zionist. And so in other words, and also the narrative, if I'm just being brutally honest, okay, the narrative has been falsified. The idea that it's an apartheid state, the idea that it's a unequal treatment of people, sort of situation. I don't think that is it at all. Remember what Golda Meir said: if the Arabs put down their arms, there would be peace. If the Israelis put down their arms, there'd be no Israel. And so the quote. And so to me, how do we get the message? How do we improve the messaging? And how do we dial down the hatred? Because the contribution that Jews have made to humanity, and if you want to think about tragedy, I think about the 6 million people that died that were playing the piano or the violin or making scientific discovery or medical discovery. I think of all of this wasted intellectual activity, this loss to humanity. So how do we get
Look, first of all,
how do we calm
Anthony,
it down?
You really are a philo-Semite. I wish all Jews love Jews as much as you do.
My producer says that I'm not a Jew, but I'm Jewish. Okay, I'm Jewish. But I said to you before this started, if you believe in freedom, Kennedy got to the wall in Berlin. He stood before the wall and he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." I can't speak Hebrew, but I think if you believe in freedom, then we're all Jews, because the Jews are the first domino that goes. Okay, and then you don't think that domino is coming for you, but guess what? Once the first domino goes, the dominoes start rolling. And Rabbi, we live in a world now that has 5.7 billion people that are living under authoritarianism. Go look at the world, go look at the map, go look at the democracies, and look at the autocrats. And the autocrats are winning. It's 5.7 billion people living under them versus us. So we have to figure this out, and we have to take back the world and make it freer and fairer.
Amen, amen, amen. Look, you covered a lot. And first of all, my vision of America is a vision that embraces a hyphen, right? You're Italian American. I'm Jewish American. These aren't the same things, but the point is we figure out, just like your childhood friendship, a way to all get along, that we all have a sense of shared destiny, even as we celebrate each other's differences. And I get into that in the beginning of the book, that there was this alternative vision. There was a famous play by a guy named Zangwill who talked about the melting pot, that somehow we all get in the same cauldron together and all of our differences allied into one shared vision of an American, which is not my vision. I actually have a vision. Another public intellectual, Horace Callan, talked about a symphony, right? That we get to celebrate your culture as an Italian American, my culture as a Jewish American, African Americans, all the different hyphens of America. That is actually what America is all about. That we can celebrate our differences and know that, as important as our differences are, as human beings created in the image of God, we have an incredible amount more in common. And then as I get into it in the book, and this gets into your next question, is that there is the issue of how can we be Americans and Zionists at the one and the same time, and that is a question that really played out around 1917, the Balfour Declaration. Louis Brandeis, he was the one who sort of first articulated this vision that one is a better American by supporting Israel and the Jewish state, that these aren't. And that was actually, in its moment, a very controversial decision of someone of Brandeis's stature to make. He was a Supreme Court justice. He was in a position of prominence, the highest Jew in the land, and he came out in favor of Jewish self-determination in what was then Palestine. And the story of American Zionism has really continued henceforth, the creation of the State of Israel, all the way up through today. But the charge of dual loyalty is a pernicious one, right? That somehow you are suspect as an American by dint of supporting self-determination in Israel. And that's something that we see on the left, that sometimes dog whistles that we see on the right, that we hear on the right, that somehow American Jews are less than full Americans because of loyalties to support Jewish self-determination in Israel. And the last thing I'll say is, strong Zionist as I am, and it really pains me, I just want to get this out here, that somehow in this season, and I'm not unaware that the elections are coming out, right? Somehow the word Zionist has become a bad word, which for me is an expression of Jewish self-determination. So it's a very painful moment that we're living in right now, where that proposition has somehow become controversial. Even with that being said, no different than I can protest my government here in America as an expression of my patriotism, my love of country, so too as an American Jew, I can express dissent with this or that decision, depending on my politic, with the Israeli government, not out of, or let me frame it in the positive, and I do that out of love of the state of Israel. So I have no expectation that every American Jew walks in lockstep with this or that Israeli government. If 500,000 Israelis can protest on the street every Saturday night out of love of country, American Jews can also have a wide berth as far as expressing their love for Israel.
Beautifully said. So I don't really have a lot to add to that. So I'm at the point in the podcast now, because I don't want to overly take your time, where our producers came up with 5 words. We all read your book, and I'm going to read out the word, and then you're going to respond to it. You ready? I'm going to say the word. You're going to say.
Yeah. I've heard your podcast. I'm ready.
Okay. All right. I say the word identity. You say what?
Say proud. I say Jews need to reclaim their identity as proud Jews. It was great to be a Jew on October 6th. It's awesome to be a Jew today.
Okay. I say Israel. You say what?
I say the culmination and realization of a multi-millennial dream of Jewish self-determination and sovereignty.
Okay. I say October 7th, that day.
Horrific. October 7th was a crime against Israelis, against Jews, and against humanity.
Elliot, I watched that IDF film, and I shared that film with a lot of executives here in New York. That 47 minutes is something that I could never forget for the rest of my life. I just want you to know that I pray for those people. Anti-Semitism. I say the word anti-Semitism. You say what?
I say a slippery slope. What starts out in the academy, what starts out with words, what starts out with marginalization, it never ends there. It can slide seamlessly, imperceptibly, and tragically into acts of violence.
But not making this political. I'm just going to say this: we need political leadership that's healing and unifying, and doesn't like to divide people. Don't respond to that, because I promise you I wouldn't make this political with you. The last word, and I'm going to let you have the last word: Judaism.
Judaism is my past, my present, and my future. It is an accident of history that I was born a Jew, and it is the privilege of my lifetime to live proudly as a Jew and to lead a community to practice a vibrant expression of Jewish living.
I'm going to tell you the word I think of, okay? You want to hear the word I think of? I think of the word love. Okay, and I'll leave it at that. All right, Rabbi, it is great to have you on my show. This is Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. The title of the book is forgive me, let me start that again. It's great to have you on my show, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. The title of the book, For Such a Time as This, on Being Jewish Today. This is the great rabbi of the Park Avenue Synagogue, Rabbi Cosgrove. Thank you for joining us on Open Book.
Thank you.